I'm Pierre-Dimitri. I'm extremely happy to be here today at Hello Tomorrow and to share a bit of light on how Uber sees and how Uber contributes to this new era of mobility. So I'd like to start by reminding all of you on what we see our mission, we Uber as a company. Our mission is creating transportation as reliable as running water. And what we see and what we believe in is that if you can create an easy way for people, a safe and affordable way for people to get a car at the tap of a button, you start to create a real alternative to individual car ownership. And if you can put more people into fewer cars, then you start to have a solution for all of the cities, and in particular for some of the toughest problems that cities around the world are facing, things like pollution, congestion, and so on. But before we talk about kind of Uber today, I'd love to take all of us, 100 years back and tell you about what we found out was the Uber way before Uber. And let me introduce the jeepneys. So this guy here is Mr. Draper, and he's essentially a car salesman in Los Angeles who invented a model in the 1900s that is a hybrid model between a taxi and a bus that looks a lot like what Uber Pool is today to some degree. And so how did he get that idea? What he observed at the time is there were a lot of people queuing every day to get into the trolley cars that existed at the time, and he started to put a sign in the window of his car offering people a ride to go and to take them from A to B in exchange for a piece of money, a jeepney, a coin, and very quickly this service took off. After a few years, in 1915, there were more than 60,000 jeepneys all across the US that were transporting people around every day. In Los Angeles, for instance, you had 150,000 people every day that were using this type of service to move around. And so why that doesn't exist anymore? Well, it's very simple. In 1919, cities and governments decided to ban that sort of service under the pressure of car manufacturers. And for the 100 years that have followed that time, there's been new and new regulations being implemented to protect transportation incumbent from the competition of ride-sharing. And this is why we live in a world today where having a car is a thing and where most people have a car. So, there's today 1 billion cars on the planet. It's enormous. That's more than the US GDP in value. And I'm sure you're thinking all of those cars are in the US. The reality is that the US indeed, and Americans love their car. 20% of the car park in the world is sitting in the US. But you still have, China car sales overtook the US in 2011. Still a lot of cars, obviously, in Europe. Looking at the data, it was clear that French people, Italian people, German people do love their cars as well. And the issue here is that the way we use our cars today, the individual car concept has a very clear public cost. And let me tell you about the different ways to think about this public cost. First of all, in terms of wasted time. Take a UK citizen. A UK citizen on average is spending 10 hours a week in his car driving. That's twice the time that is being spent socializing with friends. There's also a cost when it comes to pollution. 12% of the CO2 emissions are actually happening from, the result of cars. And finally, there's a clear cost when it comes to congestion, with 1% of GDP across the EU being, generated through traffic. That's 100 billion euros every year in the EU. And unfortunately, this is just 4% of the problem, because what happens is that 96% of the time, this is what happens with cars. They just sit idle in the middle of nowhere. And so there are cities around the world where up to a third of the public space of the land that we could use for anything, really hospitals, parks, that is being used to store those cars. And even more extreme, there's many countries where you actually have buildings like skyscrapers to just store those cars. This is the world we live in today. And the question we ask ourselves at Uber every day is, can we do something about that? Do we have ways, and can technology help us solve for that? So, of course, public transit is part of that solution. It's very clear. Now, even in a city like Paris, where you have a great public infrastructure and a fairly cheap public infrastructure network, what you observe is that there are still 15 million people, or actually 15 million trips happening every day in the greater Paris in cars. And the reason is fairly simple. The reason is that the metro you see here cannot get to everyone's doorstep. And you have a number of people that need to rely on a car day to day to move around. In Paris still, 1 out of 10 trips on Uber is happening from or to an underprivileged area. And this is part of the reasons why we feel at Uber that car in itself is not the problem. The problem is actually how we use cars. And cars should be part of the solution. So what we are focused on is what we call ride-sharing. It's this idea of an app that helps you order a car at the tap of a button so that you don't have to own your own car. There is an enormous opportunity. Today, Uber is operating in 500 cities around the world in just 7 years. And kind of when you dig in and when you look at the growth we observe, you see that this is driven mostly by people that suddenly rely on those options instead of relying on their car, or that complement what they do and how they move around using public transit. To share a stat with you, 4% of the miles driven globally today are done on ride-sharing platforms like Uber, on apps like Uber. This is going to evolve, and this will reach 25% by 2030, which is, obviously enormous. When we ask our millennial riders in the US, about Uber and about how they use Uber, 10% of them, 1 in 10 people, are telling us that they have gave up buying a car, or they've actually gotten rid of their car, which is, obviously an interesting development that tells us where the future is headed. And the reason is very simple. Again, if you can provide through an app a very simple way to order a car, a safe and affordable way to do so, why would you want to worry about, finding a parking space, being stuck behind the wheel, paying your insurance every year, and so on? We are convinced ourselves that there are huge opportunities and that technology can really make an impact and position us for this new era of mobility that's coming. And one of the innovations that I'm the most excited about and that I'd like to talk about is what we call Uber Pool. And the idea behind Uber Pool is fairly simple. When we started to expand in the US and in SF in particular, as the kind of footprint grew, we observed in cities that there were more and more trips and more people that were actually traveling along the same lines at the same time. And we started to ask ourselves, is there a way to actually match those people so that 2 trips, 2 people, 2 cars becomes 2 trips in just 1 car? And this is how we rolled out this product that we call Uber Pool, which today accounts for 60% of our trip volume in San Francisco. More than half of the people using Uber in SF are deciding to use Uber in a way that's a shared way, where someone else that they don't necessarily know is sitting next to them. When you take a step back and you look at around the world, what we see is this can have a huge impact, first of all, on traffic. This is a simulation of what happens if you take, a private car and if you transform that on a shared trips like Uber Pool, and that has very tangible impact on traffic. On top of that, we've estimated that if you were to actually transform every car on the planet into a shared car, you would only need 10% of this global car park that I was describing. That's 900 million cars that suddenly you wouldn't need. And so this is a huge impact that it can have. Now, there's much more that innovation and technology can do, and we at Uber are kind of in the middle of those innovations. What we are focused on every day is, can we make cities a better place to live in for people? Now, there's also an angle, which is, can you make cities a safer place? And the reality is that our roads today could be safer. There are 1.3 million people every day around the world that are dying in car accidents. You have 20 to 50 million people that get seriously injured in motorized accidents. And again, here technology can help, and this is why Uber starts to spend a lot of time thinking through what self-driving technology can bring, because obviously you'd have a natural decline in those sort of stats I was describing if you can roll out self-driving cars, because a lot of the accidents are actually driven by human errors. I'd like to show you a quick video of what we have going on in the autonomous field, in the self-driving field in Pittsburgh, where most of our research is focused. So I'll show you. I will conclude saying that this exciting future is getting closer. There's no doubt about that. And we see many cities around the world that are racing to become the self-driving capital of the world. Now, at the same time, it is very clear that this relies on super complex technology, and we're still early days. Self-driving cars are struggling right now with the unknown, with bad weather, with making the difference between a bag and something that's actually dangerous in the streets. And so I think there's a lot of time until that gets to something tangible that most people can use and benefit from. But the good news is we don't have to wait and wait for self-driving cars to get to a better place and to move forward to this new era of mobility. There's already a lot we can do, as I've outlined, with ride-sharing platforms, with trying to use cars as they exist today more efficiently. We spend a lot of time talking about smart cities, but actually the first step is figuring out smart regulations that unlock the potential of what technology can bring to cities. We are seeing at Uber, among all the cities where we operate into, we are seeing cities like San Francisco, for instance, like Singapore, that have embraced very early on the innovation such as ride-sharing and apps like Uber. And those cities are the ones that are likely to take a pole position in the world of tomorrow. At the same time, we're seeing cities, Dubai, for instance, that are putting restrictions on the ability for apps like Uber to actually bring a tangible alternative to owning a car. In Dubai, for instance, there is a rule that makes it mandatory for apps like Uber to charge a 30% premium versus taxis. And obviously, if you can't get that affordability element, then suddenly you don't create the sort of option and alternative that exists for people. So I would say that those cities that are making it more difficult to expand those services are likely to struggle in that transition. But more importantly, the cities that are actually embracing the shared mode of transportation, stuff like Uber Pool, all of the innovations we see in that space, and it's not just about Uber, are the cities that will have people and citizens spending less time in traffic, less time looking for parking space, citizens that will spend less of their income into buying cars or into their commute, and more importantly, citizens that would live and breathe more easily. And I think this shouldn't be a hard choice. Thank you.